presentation.
You got a microphone?
Oh, the microphone. Yes. I'll start that over. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to the presentation tonight. Brett Benson is going to present on a particular community solar garden project. I've been a member of a group known as the Renewable Energy Task Force for a number of years. There are a number of different projects that we heard about as members of the group, and you might have heard about them too, but this is the one that sold me, and one of the reasons was community solar garden, solar energy available for everybody, and the idea of solar justice. And also the idea that you start getting money back right from the beginning with a very small amount of money that you put down. So without further ado, let's get started. So Brett Benson from Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light will tell us about a community solar garden project.
Welcome.
I have a mic. Thank you, Lou. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I'm with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. As Lou mentioned, and my colleague Brianna Baker is here as well. I'll say a little bit about MNIPL a little later in the presentation so you have a sense of who we are and what we do. But I want to start with, two photos. And this, to set this up, it is for people of faith and people who care about caring for creation. It can be a discouraging time. It is easy to lose hope amid all of the news coming out of the EPA, from Washington. It is easy to get discouraged. And so one of the main points I want to leave you with is there are plenty of reasons not to be discouraged, plenty of reasons to be hopeful. And this photo, to illustrate that, is taken on Easter Sunday, 1900. And it's a little hard to see, but those are all horses and horse-drawn carriages. There's actually, that whole street is horses. There's one car, and it's so hard to see. You actually, thanks, Eric. Eric's zooming in so you can see the one car on Easter Sunday, 1900 on Fifth Avenue in New York. Now go to 13 years later. This is Fifth Ave, roughly the same angle, Fifth Avenue in New York, 1913. And if you look, there is car after car after car. There's one horse. You really have to squint to see it. So the point of this is that when we reach a tipping point of public opinion and public sentiment, we as a society can move very fast. 13 years from one car to 13 years later, one horse. So we can do the same with clean energy. So the question is, why people of faith in particular? What's the special role that people of faith have? I love this quote. This came from another colleague of mine, Erin Pratt. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it because I think it's poetic. Why are we here? And what role do people of faith have? We're here because we all believe that as people of faith, we have a critical role to play in the work of the Great Turning. That's the work of responding to the climate crisis. We believe that as people of faith, we are strengthened and equipped to respond through the practice of our faith. We're charged to live love in the world, to advocate for justice, and to trust in a greater mystery that flows through us and allows for unseen grace. And I would add that all of our faith traditions, Methodist, I'm a longtime member of Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in St. Paul, so Christian denominations, Muslim denominations, Jewish, all of our faith traditions speak to caring for creation. So there's a particular role for people of faith in translating those faith traditions into action. And people of faith are well equipped to tell this new story about clean energy and the transition to clean energy for two reasons. One, we tend to be people of hope. We're fortified and nourished by our faith traditions and our faith, and that leads us to take action, and action is one of the primary ingredients of hope. So we're people of hope, and our faith traditions speak about relationships and how to be in the world. Values, ways of living, all those things are included in our faith traditions. So that's why we believe there's this particular role for people of faith to play as we move toward a clean energy future. So with that context about getting to a tipping point and remaining hopeful in the midst of everything that's going on, we're going to talk specifically about one practical way to support clean energy, and that's through community solar gardens. So my goal here tonight is to educate you all about what community solar gardens are, what's the opportunity, and if you're interested in taking the first steps towards subscribing, we can help you out there. So the agenda, a little more detailed, we want to talk about community solar gardens as a solution to a problem, provide the basics, what are they, how do they work, where are they. I'll say a little bit more about MNIPL, my organization, and something that we started a few years ago called the Just Solar Coalition. And then we'll get into the subscription, the benefits of the subscription and what the process is. I have questions and discussion on there last, but by all means, if you have questions as I'm going, raise your hand, interrupt me, happy to answer your questions in the moment. So I mentioned community solar gardens as a solution to a problem. The good news is that solar is booming, but there also, with that boom comes some issues. This slide is maybe a little hard to read. Let me speak to the chart on the right. There's two colored lines that go back to early 1970s. There's one red line going way down, and there's one blue line that's going way up. The red line is the price of solar. So it's gone down 99% since 1970. So a lot of people, when you talk to them about solar, the impression or the reaction is, yeah, that's really expensive, right? And it's not nearly as expensive. It's not expensive. So more and more homeowners are realizing, yeah, this is something, and churches and faith organizations and other folks are realizing this is something we can do. So it's no surprise that as the price of solar has gone down like that, the number of installations in the United States has gone up. So it took about 40 years from 1970 to reach 1 million solar installations in the United States. And the projections are that we'll hit 2 million in the next 6 months or so. And we may have already hit it, actually. So that gives you a sense of how fast solar adoption is on the increase. So just in the last 9 years, solar installations in the United States have grown 17-fold. In Minnesota, the volume of solar installations grew 80% in just the first 3 months of this year. That's 80% over everything else that had been installed. The 71% of the people in the state, and this is true both in the Twin Cities and outside the Twin Cities, 71% of Minnesotans support raising the state's renewable energy standard. So there aren't that many issues that get that kind of bipartisan level of support. And actually, if you're interested in the renewable energy standard, one of the handouts in back is about the RES. I won't talk about it beyond that tonight, but there's more information there. I mentioned the cost of producing solar has gone down 99% since 1970. It's actually, a lot of that is in the last 10 years. It's gone down 80% since 2009. And in terms of economic development, the solar industry is growing 17 times faster as the rest of the economy. Generally, you see wind technician and solar technician, number 1 and 2, sometimes they flip, in the fastest growing jobs. So there's a lot of energy, a lot of activity around solar in the United States and in Minnesota. Here's the problem. A lot of folks can't put solar on their roof. because their roof faces east, or that they have a big hip joint, or there's a huge tree that provides too much shade, or they can't afford it, or they just don't want to do it. They don't want to put panels on their own roof. And for all those reasons, Minnesota as a state, just a few years ago in 2013, the legislature passed the community solar law that created this program. Minnesota really is a pioneer in the United States. Minnesota, Colorado, California, and Massachusetts. Pioneer in the community solar garden program. And the goal is, rather than waiting for individual homeowners who may or may not be able to do solar, let's create something that everybody can participate in. So most households and organizations can support the generation of solar power by participating in a solar garden. It actually are subscribing is the terminology. And a solar garden, a community solar garden, it's probably good to define terms here because there's a community solar garden that's sanctioned in state law, which is, I would call that uppercase C, uppercase S, community solar. And that's one where, any 200 folks might subscribe to the same solar garden. There's also a lot of community-based solar, where a community group will get together and they'll do fundraising to try to support solar. So it's still community-based, but it's not the kind of community solar that's actually called for in the legislation. That's a special sort of community solar. And it's just a large array of solar panels in a field or on a rooftop somewhere that any number of people can subscribe for. And it doesn't produce, this is probably self-evident, but it's worth repeating that solar energy is pollution-free. Unlike coal, nuclear, gas, oil, it doesn't generates a tiny bit of greenhouse gases in the construction of the solar panels, but it's much more environmentally friendly than any sort of fossil fuel by a factor of multiples. So any questions about that part so far? I have more details about community solar here. Yeah.
Is that decommissioning after the solar panels are no longer usable? Does that include decommissioning?
So the question is if that includes decommissioning when the solar panels are no longer usable. I don't think it does, except here's the thing about solar panels. They have about a 40-year, well, they're warranted for 25 years. But they can withstand golf ball sized hail going at 50 miles an hour. And so they're made to be outdoors. So they tend to go as much as 40 years. So we actually haven't gotten to too much of the decommissioning yet. That's probably coming. The federal tax credit that applies to solar only applies to new projects, to new panels. So when that federal tax credit expires, there's going to be a market for used panels. And the thinking is that they actually won't be decommissioned. They'll just be sold as used panels for, to save money on a project. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned Minnesota is this community solar garden pioneer. Part of this is, and Minnesota has had a leading role in setting policies as a state to support clean energy. In 2007, Minnesota set a target to generate 25% of its electricity from renewables by 2030. That's the renewable energy standard that I mentioned. We're at about 21%, so that's pretty good. There's a legislation, the move to increase that is let's get to 50% of our energy by 2030. Not just, we're already close to hitting that mark that we set in 2007. Let's aim higher.
What proportion of the non-Excel territory, like Mankato, actually can also participate in this kind of program?
A lot of co-op and municipal utilities have created their own solar garden programs outside of Excel territory. There's three utilities in the state that are mandated to do this. They're all investor-owned utilities, so it's Minnesota Power and Duluth, Excel, mostly in the southern part of the state, and Otter Tail. So they have to. Everybody else, the community solar garden programs are optional for co-op and municipal. And many of those, if not most of them, are actually, you don't save much money, and you, in some cases, have to pay more money because you wind up buying a certain number of solar panels at usually about $600 a panel. So there's an expense that goes along with it. So I'm not familiar with what Benco has done, but they have that option to set one up themselves. The solar gardens that we're promoting through Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light are for Excel customers.
These assembled in Minnesota, or are they all Chinese?
The panels will vary from installation to installation. It depends on where the developer can get the best panels for the cheapest. I'll say more about our partner, the developer. I think they have gotten some of them from China, where the panels are fairly cheap. Some others are coming from actually a manufacturer in Canada, Hylene. So I mentioned the renewable energy standard. The other thing the state has done in a fairly progressive way around solar energy is mandating not just that you hit certain targets for clean energy, but a certain percentage of that has to be solar. So if you remember the uptick nationwide about solar, in Minnesota, the state legislature has taken some actions that are actually further promoting, encouraging and forcing utilities. Excel actually is pretty good at this, even on their own. They're actually far outpacing what the state goals are.
So the 21% renewable is photovoltaics only, or photovoltaics and wind?
It's both. Yep. So before I get into, so how does this work? How do I subscribe? Just the 3 quick benefits for solar gardens to keep in mind. It allows subscribers to support clean energy and reduce reliance on fossil fuels. You save money on your electric bills if you're in the community solar garden programs that we're promoting. As I mentioned, some community solar gardens, you have to pay $600 up front, and you might wind or $1,200 or $1,800, depends on how many solar panels you buy. And you might save money over time, but you still have to do that investment. And some utilities are actually saying, no, we'd like you to invest in our solar energy product programs, and you don't get anything in return. You just give us a check for $1,200, and you can feel good that you're supporting clean energy, but there's no money savings. And the third benefit is, for some folks, is that I don't have to install solar panels on my own home. So how does community solar gardens work? The solar panels are installed on a central location, a large solar array. The electricity from that solar array goes to Xcel Energy, or the utility. The utility, nobody's actually getting their electricity directly from the solar garden. It's not, the electrons are not coming straight from the solar garden into your house. It's just going out into the grid, and then it's offsetting, that clean energy is essentially offsetting my energy usage. So as a subscriber, I'm supporting clean energy up to a level that matches what I use at home. And then I get credits from Xcel every month for the amount of, I've become a solar energy producer, and I get credits for that. And the credits, this is how you save money, the credits are greater than what I pay to the solar garden developer as a subscriber. Every month, the credits are always greater than what I'm billed from the developer as a subscriber. So we work with a community solar garden developer called Cooperative Energy Futures. Cooperative Energy Futures is a member-owned co-op based in the Twin Cities. And there are, CEF, the co-op, is developing 8 solar gardens right now. There's one in Waseca County that's for folks in Blue Earth County, they're eligible to subscribe to that. There's one in Rice County, one in Sherburne County, and one in Freeborn County. So you can see the stars on the map are those counties. And then all of those are ground mounted on what used to be fields, cornfields, I believe. And for those, subscriptions are open. And then there are 4 more community solar gardens in Hennepin County. 2 of those are fully subscribed. They're on rooftops. And there's one more that's almost fully subscribed. And then another one that we haven't even started taking subscriptions on. It'll be in downtown Minneapolis. Those are all mounted on rooftops. It's hard, in cities, it's hard to find open spaces for community solar gardens, but rooftops are a great underused asset for solar. So if you live in the same county where there's a solar garden that's being installed, or a nearby county, an adjacent county, you can subscribe. So that means for the solar garden that's in Waseca County, people who live in Blue Earth, Faribault, Freeborn, Le Sueur, Rice, Steele, and Waseca can subscribe, but not Nicollet, Chuck, to your point, unfortunately.
Just run an extension cord.
Just run an extension cord, yeah. So this is a little too small to read, but let me do this. So the number of households, these are the same 8 solar gardens that I was just describing. You can see on the right side here, Eric, if you can scroll over, this is the capacity there. The one on the roof of the Pax Christi Catholic Church is fairly small, 220 kilowatts. Otherwise, they're 1.3, 1.4 megawatts. And that's somewhere between 185 to 200 households. It varies depending upon how big the subscriptions are, which varies, again, on how much energy any given household uses. So you can see there's a number of households, but it's not, they're not going to last forever. It's also, there's thousands of people who live in these counties, obviously. I'll just move on. So questions about how solar gardens, at least that much at a broad level, you're getting electricity goes to the utility pays you because you're essentially a solar producer now. You get that credit on your bill, and meantime, you're paying for your subscription, and there's always a difference between those two amounts. The bill rate is lower than the credit rate.
Maybe you're going to talk about this more, but subscriptions, is there time that you have to, like, I'm going to do this for 20 years if I move?
Yep.
And what happens? So talk more about the subscriptions and what are the requirements?
Sure. You're subscribing for 25 years, so that's a long time. And there are most people don't know if they're going to be in their house for 25. I don't know if I'm going to be in my house for 25 years. So there are 3 ways to end the subscription. One is if you move and you stay in the subscription area, you can take your subscription with you. So let's say you're at year 7 of this 25-year agreement, you're moving to a new house. The clock does not start over. You take your subscription to your new property. It gets resized because presumably you're going to be using a different amount of electricity. So that's your typical electricity usage determines how much you can subscribe for, but you can take it with you. So that's option 1. Option 2, I don't want to do that. I'm moving out of state, or you can transfer the subscription to somebody else. So that might be the person who's buying your house, potentially. So they can, we've had a number of real estate agents who said, yeah, that would be kind of an attractive thing if I could just put that on top and say this house comes with a solar garden subscription. And again, if it's at year 7, it just continues at year 7 or year 10, whatever it is. And with that option, it's a $75 fee to transfer the subscription to somebody else. And then the third option, if neither of those first 2 works, I should say the second option as well. If you want to, it doesn't have to be the person who's buying your house. It could just be a friend or a family member. You can just transfer the subscription to them as long as they're in the subscription territory. And then again, there's a $75 fee, but you can move it to a different property. And then the third option is just to cancel it altogether, and that's with 3 months notice, you can cancel the subscription, and you pay your bill the last 3 months. So that the only situation where we think there's an issue. I mean, ideally, we'd love for somebody to transfer it or take it with them, but if somebody really wants to cancel it and they say, no, I'm moving to Arizona tomorrow and I want to be done, well, they'll still have to pay 3 months. Even if they're not there, but most people know, 3 months ahead of time that they're moving. So that's
Penalty fee.
no. Just got to pay your bill. And that, I mean, that really gives Cooperative Energy Futures time to find a replacement subscriber.
Maintenance fees and that kind of stuff.
So the question is about maintenance fees. There are none. You're paying a monthly subscription amount, and the maintenance, and these things really don't require a lot of maintenance. Occasionally the inverters need to, but what you're paying in monthly fees goes toward the upkeep of the garden. And for things like, hail, it's insured. So like I said, hail is probably not going to do much damage. A tornado would, but all bets are off at that point if it wipes out the whole solar garden. And I mean, it'll get rebuilt presumably with the insurance money.
This area, how productive is the land that's being taken out of use by these towns?
That's a great question. One of our core values, I'm going to speak in a minute to something called the Just Solar Coalition, which is a values-based collection of faith organizations and solar developers and nonprofits and co-ops. And one of our values is protecting the natural environment. And that seems maybe a little silly to include that as a value in a program that's designed to support solar, because of course that's protecting the natural environment. But there are lots of ways to do solar that are more or less respectful and more or less protecting of the natural environment. For instance, in Wright County, the county commission, actually this is probably about 18 months ago now, put a moratorium on community solar gardens because farmers were selling their land or leasing the land to developers, and developers were coming in and bulldozing down trees to put up solar gardens. Well, solar is environmentally friendly, but bulldozing trees is not all that environmentally friendly. So that's one way that you can do this that's not protective of the natural environment. So for our for rooftop arrays, it's a win for everybody because there's really very few environmental downsides to putting solar on somebody's rooftop. For ground-mounted solar arrays, it's typically we're taking corn fields out of production, which, there's a debate about how carbon or how much greenhouse gas goes into the creation of cornfields, and could that land be better used to create corn, to create ethanol, and how environmentally friendly is ethanol? But for the most part, I think most people agree, at the very least, taking a cornfield out and putting a solar installation in is going to be an improvement in terms of environmental friendliness. It's debatable, but that's our view anyway. There's plenty of cornfields out there. Say again?
Isn't the price of land here going to raise the cost? We have the most expensive farmland in the state.
Yes, and finding sites for solar gardens is tricky because of that. It's not always, the developers are not always buying the land. In some cases, they're just leasing the land. But either way, the cost of the solar is going to be higher because the farmers can get a lot more in some cases, or can get a lot by just leaving it in production or selling it as farmland. There's also, you don't need, obviously you don't want to put a solar array on a wetland or something, but there's a lot of land that's not necessarily in production, that's not a wetland, that's big enough that you could use for a solar array too. There's no shortage of places in theory, to put solar gardens. I'm not sure, does that speak to your question? Okay.
This place in Lake Crystal, there is a solar array put on wetlands, but it's set up so that it minimizes the wetlands in the sense that it's up on stilts and it's raised to where some light and things can get to it, so minimum impact.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's cool. Thank you. And a lot of land-based or ground-mounted solar arrays, they take pains to make sure they're planting pollinator-friendly plants between the rows of solar panels. And there's actually a pollinator standard that a lot of more and more developers are adhering to. So the land essentially becomes multi-purpose.
DNR in New Ulm has set that system up.
With the pollinator-friendly plants?
That the way they've set their solar, where they can go underneath and do whatever maintenance they need, but also that the prairie will be stored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you look at pictures of a couple different solar gardens, some of them you'll see will just be gravel and nothing else between the rows. And there's a lot more you can do with it.
That's primarily around some of the ethanol plants.
So I want to talk a little bit about Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, who we are, and the Just Solar Coalition, which I've mentioned a couple of times. MNIPL, we're a nonprofit. We work in Minnesota with a network of about 450 faith organizations. Most of them are in the Twin Cities, northern Minnesota, St. Peter, and then we're doing more work. We're growing into Mankato, this area, and Rochester. And what we do is we simply help faith organizations fight climate change and support climate justice. And I mentioned earlier, why do we think faith organizations are well equipped to do that? We believe that the active care of creation is integral to spiritual life and social justice. So we help churches understand, well, what can we do? Where do we even start? Well, we can help. Before dinner, I was at a meeting at First UCC here in Mankato. They were talking about they're considering putting solar on their roof. And so that's an area we help churches navigate the decision-making process and understand their options for that. You can imagine probably most of those 450 churches are considering, what can we do? And most of them, their next question is, where do we even start? And so that's where we come in. We can plug churches and help churches understand what their options are.
My understanding that church buildings like this would not qualify for the program, is that right?
Are you talking about rooftop solar? No, churches can put solar on their own roof.
Part of the solar garden.
Oh, I understand now. Yeah, actually, I'm going to mispronounce your name. Centenary, thank you. The programs that we're offering are targeted to residential customers and low-income residential customers in particular. Any residential, but we're really in particular interested in low income. And we'll accept small general service, that's the rate class that Excel charges. But if we accepted general service, bigger customers like Centenary, that would skew the economics for the developer, so we'd have to charge the residential customers more. And so there are some solar gardens that don't have that same distinction because they're not specifically targeting residential, but we're focused primarily on residential. There's church, there are other solar gardens where, because they're looking at commercial customers, they really only want big commercial customers. They can fill a solar garden with just 5 commercial or industrial customers, and they're looking for large industries, companies that have audited books, and they're going to be financially sound for 25 years. And a lot of churches don't fit that category. So unfortunately for community solar gardens, getting a subscription themselves can be a little difficult. But it's also possible to talk about putting solar on your own roof and saving money and supporting clean energy that way. And in fact, that's what we typically recommend churches start looking at, because if you do community solar, it's a benefit, and it does support clean energy, there's no question, but it's invisible, right? There's nothing on this site that says, hey, here's what we're doing. And for a lot of churches, they want to be able to model leadership and say, here's what we're doing in the way of stewardship. We got solar panels on our roof, and there's a little iPad near the front door that shows how much electricity we're generating. And so it's about modeling resilience and hope and demonstrating leadership for the community. But many churches I still don't know if we want to do that. So then we can talk to you about community solar, but the options are pretty limited right now. if it's something you're interested in as a church, I would say the first place to start is think about rooftop solar.
Is Made in Minnesota still that an option?
It's not. Made in Minnesota, he asked about Made in Minnesota, which is a program designed to support state manufacturing of solar panels. It was a 10-year program, and the legislature this last session, April or May, ended the program after year 4. And we were opposed to the ending the program. It was pretty popular and pretty successful, but we lost on that one.
Why did they?
I don't have a good answer to that question. What the folks who were lobbying to kill it would say is that it wasn't effective, but we actually had a lot of data that said it was effective. So it depends on what you mean by effective, I guess. What's that? It was political, there's no question, yeah. So that was a program that was a lottery-based program and helped churches and residential people put solar and do it in a way they could pay off their investment in about 5 or 6 or 7 years. So that's gone. Excel still has a program called Solar Rewards, which is a rebate program. It's not quite as beneficial in terms of the money, but it's also not a lottery. It's just, you can apply and get in, and that helps that makes doing rooftop solar easier. That's the first UCC that I mentioned. They're looking at applying for that program to help support solar panels on their roof. All right, so that's a bit about MNIPL. All of our work fits into 3 categories. We call these the 3-legged stool of engagement, or the 3-legged stool of change. So practical, systemic, and spiritual relational. So practical is outreach and education for community solar gardens. This meeting here is an example of the practical work we do. We also, as I've said, help churches understand what about solar on their own rooftops. Systemic policy advocacy, we're part of a faith-based campaign to support the renewable energy standard. That's part of the policy advocacy work we do. And spiritual relational, we work with faith communities to help them understand how can we use a movement toward clean energy as a way to build community within our place of worship. How can we leverage existing community to get more momentum? So how do we get people together? We've just in the last couple weeks we've started solar house parties. So we get together in somebody's house and we have one person talk about community solar. It's hosted by a member of the community. So it's fun, it's social. That's another example of spiritual and relational.
There seem to be a bunch of these marketed in the area. How do we choose which one?
Yeah, probably from a practical standpoint, the 3 things you should ask for community solar gardens are how much money do I save, or how much is it going to cost me? What does it take to get out of the contract? I mentioned that what it takes for the programs we support, that it's not the same for every solar developer. In some cases, you have to pay until you find a replacement. If it takes a year, you're going to be paying your bill. So those 2, and then the other piece is what are the values of the community solar garden developer? And is it a program that's just designed to make money? I mean, which is not a bad thing, and more solar is always better, but is there something else that's values based about it? So those are the 3 things that I would say.
One of the questions that I quickly experienced is this gap in doing billing, disputes, business savvy.
Yeah, those are great questions. I will tell you that, in Minnesota, since this is the state law was passed in 2013, and it was kind of slow going because Excel dragged its feet a little bit for the first few years. It's really only in the last couple of years that community solar has taken off. So there aren't companies that have, a 10 or 15-year track record. Everybody's a little bit of a pioneer in this space. So we, partly because of that, what I just said about wanting to work with values-based organizations. We started the Just Solar Coalition a few years ago. We're now up to 7 developers, including Cooperative Energy Futures, which is a local member-owned co-op. So for us, another point that we make is that you're working with a local nonprofit and a local co-op, and there are a lot of other developers. They're good companies. I'm not going to disparage them, but you're working with, there's a company that's based in Colorado. There's a company that's based in California. Tesla is Solar City is one of the largest developers of community solar gardens, and they're owned by Tesla, which is cool. I'd like to be a Tesla customer myself. So it just becomes, who do I want to do business with is another question. So the 4 values of the Cooperative Energy Futures, and we think of this as the equivalent of fair trade coffee. If you go to the grocery and buy fair trade coffee, and it's got that label on it, you know a little bit about what that means and what went into producing that coffee. That the growers were treated fairly. And so that's what our intention for the Just Solar Coalition is, that if I'm working with a member of the Just Solar Coalition, one of the installers, that MNIPL has done some level of vetting, and that creates confidence that I'm working with a trustworthy group, and that, again, a group that's not just trying to make a buck, but wants to do something that's more meaningful. So the 4 values: provide access to the benefits of clean energy for all income levels, regardless of income or credit score. So again, if I have to pay $1,200 to participate, I've just excluded a whole bunch of people. So, and we always say, we're never going to get to 100% clean energy future if 50% of us are left behind because we don't make enough money or we don't have a credit score. This is Lou, in introducing me, talked about this social justice here, right? And that's one of the reasons. And that's why we exist as an organization at MNIPL, because we want to make sure this transition happens in a way that's supporting core values and the values of faith traditions. Yes, ma'am.
So do you charge according to income levels as far as there's different rates or?
No, the way this works, a lot of community solar gardens, if you have a credit score of 600 or less, or 650 or less, it varies, you can't subscribe. Literally, it's only available above certain credit scores. And so what we say is that's, anybody can subscribe to these solar gardens.
Well, then you're not.
I'm sorry?
How are you addressing low-income people?
Well, low-income people tend to have lower credit scores.
Right, but then how are they going to get this energy?
Well, it saves them money on their electricity bill.
No, but what did you say? You said if you have a credit score over 650 and not subscribe?
No, under.
That's
Under.
for other people, other developers. That's a lot.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, a lot of other developers set that rule.
What is yours?
There is no credit score limitation.
Okay.
Anybody can
You
subscribe.
don't have what is it?
Verification.
Like a guideline where the lower your income, the less you have to pay.
Oh, I understand your question. No, thank you. No, we don't. Everybody, because we don't do income verification, but what we say is anybody can subscribe, and we in particular target and market community solar gardens to low-income folks. That doesn't mean we exclude people who are middle income or above.
But they have to pay as somebody that makes $100,000 a year.
Well, they're actually saving money. I mean, there is no payment here, so nobody's paying. There's a one-time payment of $25. So, and after that, nobody pays anything. In fact, you save money on your electric bill. Yep. So the higher your electric bill is, which doesn't necessarily equate to income, but the more you save.
So the only bill you really get is your Excel bill, correct? Credit?
No, here, let me advance to that slide here. So you actually get, that's just to use round numbers, if you're paying $100 to Excel now and writing one bill or one check for one bill, when you subscribe, you're going to get 2 statements, 2 bills, one from Cooperative Energy Futures, which is the developer, and then another one from Excel. The 2 of those together will be less than the one bill you had before. So it might be if you were paying $100 to Excel before, now you're going to pay $50 to Excel, or because you're going to get a credit. It'll reduce your $100 bill, cut it in half. And you're going to pay $40 to Cooperative Energy Futures. So 50 plus 40 is 90. So you're saving money versus what you would have paid $100. And the reason that is, see if you can, what you pay right now to Excel, to Cooperative Energy Futures, it's called the bill rate is 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's what you pay to subscribe. And then Excel pays you 15.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's the difference between those two rates is how you wind up saving money. So you'll get two bills. One of them, the Excel bill, will also have a credit on it, and the credit will always be more than you need to pay the Cooperative Energy Futures bill. Yes.
Different locations.
Yep. Yeah. So, or automatic auto pay. Yeah. But yes, you're right. There's still two checks. We've been trying to get Excel to put everything on their bill, but you can imagine the administrative and operational complexities. There's lots of different solar gardens. Excel has said that it's too complicated for their system. So they'll put the credit on because they know how much energy is being produced by the solar garden and how much my share is, but they won't put the other bill on. So there is still two bills.
Which garden is where the energy coming in?
To get into the Excel if I'm a community solar garden developer, I have to agree to set up a system so I'm sending information to Excel and getting information from Excel systems. Yep. Well, you communicate. You tell Excel, if you sign up, you sign something called an agency agreement with Excel. It basically says, I'm signing up for this solar garden, so start sending me credits, however much I've signed up for. Back up a little bit here. Let's see. Thanks for the questions, by the way. The other four values, I mentioned full access is one of our key values. Promoting local jobs and lessening racial disparities in emerging clean energy economy. Projections are that clean energy jobs in Minnesota will grow by 15,000 over the next 12 years. And it's our hope that we can make sure that at least half of those jobs go to people of color or native populations. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of economic, clean energy can be an economic engine, and we want to make sure the benefits of that economic engine don't just flow to folks who are already comfortable, don't just flow to the affluent. So how can we use the economic engine to address racial and economic inequities? Respect the natural environment, I've spoken about that, and then tell a new story about how energy is generated. Most people, when they think about electricity, they think about it, if at all, once a month when they pay their bill, and they don't necessarily think about it when they flip their switch on, but it's just something that's always there. But the new story we want to tell about electricity is akin to the local food movement. So more and more people are asking themselves, where did this food come from that I'm buying at the grocery? How was it sourced? Was it sustainable? I want to be an informed consumer about my food. There's a local healthcare movement increasingly. I want to be an informed consumer about my healthcare. How does it work? How can I participate in a knowledgeable way? And that's what we're trying to drive with clean energy as well. How do we help people in an environment where there's a clear climate crisis? How do we help people become more knowledgeable about the energy they're using? If they're more knowledgeable, they're more likely to take action. So those are the four values. Cooperative Energy Futures, our partner in this. I'll just say briefly, as a co-op, some of you probably belong to other co-ops, the mission is to build wealth for member subscribers. Another piece of that is, since it is a co-op, there's dividends. They're not going to be dividends for the first half dozen years for this program, but if you subscribe, the idea is down the road, there'll be dividends, co-op dividends, just like if you belong to a co-op grocery. Community engagement and community building is a big part of what both CEF and MNIPL do. So this sort of conversation within communities is part of that. And CEF's goal is to create a new relationship between people and the energy they use. That matches up with the value that I just described about telling a new story. So I mentioned this before, but the benefits of subscribing are it saves money, you can support clean energy, you don't have to put panels on your roof. You can also support the values of climate justice. You're providing community leadership, whether it's as a church or as an individual. It's something you can do to say, I'm taking an action here, and you're modeling leadership behavior for others in your community and in your network. Support cooperative values. That's something that most people support. And then, as I mentioned, save money on your electric bill. So this slide we've already seen, and again, it's the difference between those two amounts. That's how you save money. Yeah.
Where do those are they negotiated periodically, or?
Yeah, the 14.5s, they are negotiated. They're reset periodically. The 14.5 cents, that's what you pay. Again, that's called the bill rate you're going to pay to Cooperative Energy Futures. That's in the contract. It starts at 14.5, and then it goes up 2% a year for the first 8 years, and then it's flat after that. So you're essentially locking in the price you pay for electricity for 25 years. You know it's got this gradual increase, and then it stays flat. Meantime, the rate you get back, which is this other number, 15.31 cents, that's tied to the price of electricity. So that's not necessarily pegged in. It's not locked in. It just depends on what do you think Excel is going to do over the next 25 years. So the modeling here is the savings projections are all based on an assumption that Excel will raise the price of electricity 3% a year over the next 25 years. They could go more, they could go less, but at 3%, which is actually pretty conservative, the savings grows, the gap between the two rates that I described starts getting bigger and bigger, especially after year 8. So the savings in out years become greater and greater. By the end of the contract, you're actually saving about 42, 43% a year on your electricity bill. You start out at about 6% and it grows to 43%. It's also possible if the price of electricity goes up more, you're going to wind up saving because you've locked in your price. If the price of electricity goes up even higher than 3%, you'll wind up saving even more than the gap between those two numbers.
What's the likelihood that Excel's rates will go down?
Not impossible, but highly unlikely.
Just for that presentation, we talked about the cost of energy going down dramatically because of some of these things. Lower cost of solar, more.
Yep. Yeah, so solar, and Excel is a big investor, and particularly in wind, but I'm not privy to their business strategy, but Excel also has some huge coal plants that it needs to retire, and that's it's a hugely expensive endeavor. So the price of electricity has gone up about 4.5% on average for the last 15 years. So it is possible that Excel will come out and drop the price of electricity. Again, it's doubtful. But even if that were to happen, all of a sudden, like, hey, I'm underwater now. Then back to your question earlier, how do you get out of your contract? You just cancel your contract, and you're in the same situation you are today, which is paying Excel. I'm no longer a subscriber.
Okay, I've heard that there's no really good way to store the energy point in time. So what if Minnesota, obviously, we have a couple months with really no or not much sun, which happens. So then what happens?
Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, because all of the energy from the solar garden is going right onto the grid, there's no storage that's necessary, right? It just goes right into the grid and it gets used the same way other electricity gets used. And you're right that right now it's the batteries for folks who are putting solar on their own rooftops and thinking about storing some of it in batteries so they can power stuff overnight. The battery technology is not quite there. It's getting there. It's pretty close. Tesla is driving it forward.
Are what happens when you have 2 months of sun?
So solar production, a couple of thoughts. Solar production goes down in the winter, right? So the amount that you're paying Cooperative Energy Futures goes down, so your bill goes down, and the credits you get back from Excel go down. But you're always saving because there's always the relationship between the bill rate and the credit rate. So even at on a month with not a lot of sunshine, your credit back from, you still get a credit, yeah, for whatever it's produced. And actually, Minnesota is a better state for solar than most people think. It's Germany. You've probably all heard Germany's does gangbusters for solar. Minnesota is a better, in general, has more solar production capacity than Germany does. And it's partly actually the lack of sunshine in the winter, or the shorter sunshine, is obviously going to decrease solar power, but solar panels perform better in the cold than they do in the hot. So you get a little bit of a adjustment because of that, a little bit of an improvement because of that. So you asked the question about, are these rates locked in? Did that answer your question, that they're not locked in? Well, contractually, you will lock in a rate, and you know what it is that you're paying, and then the credit rate depends on the price of electricity, which we think is going to go up.
Solar system goes down, malfunction.
Right. If there's, for whatever reason, there's no solar production, you don't have a bill that month, and you don't get a credit that month. We hope that doesn't happen. So here's a sample projected savings curve. That's a green, that little shape on top is over 25 years. So you can see it's about year 8. There's not really a steep curve upward, but it starts to curve upward about year 8. That's the year when the price stays flat, the price you're paying stays flat at that point. So you can see the savings accumulate. So this is an average size subscription, 6.5 kilowatts, maybe slightly larger than average for most homeowners. You can see the first year savings, $64. So it's not enough to retire your mortgage, but you can go out to eat. So that's about a little over 6% savings the first year. And then over 25 years, you've saved $9,000 or 23%. So I mentioned, so it's 6% here, it's about 43, 42% here, and that on average, it winds up being 23.5. And the upfront investment is $25. That's to join the co-op. That's for a lifetime membership. So $9,044, I mean, again, that's not a get-rich-quick investment, but for most people, I'm doing this because I want to support clean energy, and I save some money. So it's kind of a win in a couple different ways. So steps in the subscription process, there's a couple different steps. Brianna's going to pass out a form. If you want to take the first step, which is you're not signing up for anything, you can just put your name down on the form. And what this does is gives Excel, we'll send you an email with a link to give Excel permission to share your electricity usage with us. And that's what we need. The amount you can subscribe for is based on how much energy your house uses now. So we need to get that data from Excel, and then we'll come back to you and say, yeah, you have your subscription cap is 6.5 kilowatts, and here's how much you might save based on that. But the first step is just getting that data back from Excel. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and sign your name on the sheet here.
What if you put on an addition or something and your electricity goes up?
Yep.
Quite a bit.
You can, or if you get an electric car, a lot of people ask about that. Yeah. And the answer is you can get your subscription resized. So now all of a sudden you're eligible for even more than you were before. Under state law, you can actually subscribe for up to 120% of your household's usage. And so if that usage figure goes up, you can get it resized. If it goes down, you could get it resized too if you wanted to. You wouldn't want to, I don't know why you would, because you'd save less money then. But if it goes up, and if the solar garden has more room, I mean, there's a maximum number of panels, maximum number of subscribers. So if you want to get more, the solar garden has to have more capacity. It's also possible to subscribe to more than one solar garden if you want to. It starts to get kind of complicated to manage all that, but in other words, there are options if you start using more electricity.
So what is the amount of the subscription?
I'm sorry?
What's the monthly subscription rate? I mean, I know it depends on how much electricity you use.
Mm-hmm.
On average, say if I pay $100 a month, what would my subscription? Is everybody's different?
If you're paying $100 a month, you're probably somewhere in this ballpark, 6, it depends. But what would happen in this scenario is, again, it does vary depending on July, it's going to be different than February. But you might get a bill from Excel that lists your $100 worth of usage, and then it'll have a $50 credit on it for your solar garden production, and then you'll pay a $40 bill to Cooperative Energy Futures.
Oh, so
It'll change month to month, yep. Some months, in July, maybe that example might be, I don't know, April. But let's take a month like July or August where there's a lot of production coming off the solar garden. You get a $100 bill from Excel with a credit on it of $140. So you have a net credit now of $40 from Excel. And then you'll get a bill for Cooperative Energy Futures for $120, say. So your net between those two, you're going to save $20 that month, and it'll completely pay your bill. And what Excel does with those credits is it'll keep rolling them forward. So it'll roll that extra $20 credit to the next month, and it'll reduce your bill even further the next month. And if you have, at the end of the year, if you have a net credit balance, Excel cuts you a check. The checks come out in February. So it's kind of like tax returns. Once a year, you might get a check from Excel, in addition to what you're saving every month. So the steps in the process, if you want to sign up for the first step, again, it's no obligation, it's just we'll send you a link to a customer consent form. Excel sends us data. We run the data through our model, come back to you and say, here's how much you might expect to save. It depends a little bit on how much sunshine there is, and so your mileage may vary, but the estimates give you at least a sense of the ballpark. And then you can decide if you want to sign up. There's some paperwork, and if you sign up, then you'll start seeing credits on your bill when the solar garden goes live. In this case, spring of 2018. What if I want to cancel my subscription? We talked about this. There's 3 options. Happy to talk more, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. There are other solar options. If you want to talk about rooftop solar, like you can do both community solar and rooftop. You can combine those, but you can't go over 120%. So if your rooftop installation is producing 120% of your household's energy needs, you can't subscribe to community solar, and vice versa. So you could have 60% of your energy coming from your rooftop installation and then have a subscription for 60% from community solar. That works if you want. So if you are interested in rooftop, we have developers who do rooftop. We also work with developers who do community solar, and we can get you connected. They're part of our Just Solar coalition. It's important to understand the differences between community solar gardens. This was to your question earlier, sir. Length of the contract, the bill rate and escalation curve, assumptions about the price of electricity. There's a great resource called the Clean Energy Resource Teams, run by the University of Minnesota. If you Google Clean Energy Resource Teams, you'll find it. They have a map of community solar gardens all over the state. In theory, it's every community solar garden that's available. I think that's accurate. The only challenge with that map is they don't always keep it updated about is the solar garden fully subscribed or not. A lot of solar gardens that are in the state are already fully subscribed, and you don't necessarily know that by looking at the Clean Energy Resource Teams.
The physical garden already built?
The one I'm talking about? No, it'll be built in the spring.
And that's in Waseca?
Yeah, it's near Janesville in Waseca County.
Which side of it?
I don't know.
Right on 14?
14 sounds right, yeah. That's the main highway, right? Through Janesville?
Right.
Yeah, so it is, yep.
How does this differ from the installation of sisters at Good Counsel?
School Sisters of Notre Dame. The solar developer that's installing their array is a group out of the Twin Cities called Innovative Power Systems. And they're only looking for commercial and industrial subscribers, or subscribers who have audited financials, who are big enough so that they only can have five subscribers, and they'll be all the customer acquisition that they have to do. So they're not in other words, they're not accepting homeowners, residential subscriptions. And it's from a business standpoint, it makes sense. We want to sign up about 200 households or 180, and to do that, we have to talk to probably 3 times that many folks. So if you're running a business, you need to talk to 540 people versus homeowners versus maybe 20 businesses. It's a lot. It's just operational. It's a lot easier to try to sell this to businesses. But again, our value, one of our core values is making sure everybody has access to this. So that's why we're a nonprofit, so we can do it this way.
Well, how is governance of the co-op?
There's a co-op board. So if you want to run for the co-op board, there's voting. It's kind of the typical governance structure. I think the co-op membership is growing pretty fast, right? You're going to nominate Lou? I'll vote for him.
This probably isn't part of your presentation, but the obvious question is, why isn't Excel just doing this itself? Why is there a third party involved in this? And the second part of that question is, who's really putting up the capital to put this in frame?
Yep. The answer to the first question is Excel has to allow third-party developers. That's part of, and so does Minnesota Power and Otter Tail Power, although they're not doing it. Excel has actually been pretty open about it, and they're slow at first, but they're being moving faster now. And for them, this is an opportunity to be a good citizen, because these small solar gardens are not really competition for Excel. I mean, they start to become competition when it's big, the really big solar gardens, right? Utility scale. But this is, by law, this is small solar garden stuff. So it's a way for Excel to be a good corporate citizen, to support clean energy. So they're not always, there's some developers who will tell you that it's a challenge to work with Excel for a lot of reasons. But for the most part, it's in their best interest. And so the financing for this, there are, in this case, it's NCAP partners. I mean, I don't have much expertise here. It's the developer that's finding the money, but it's socially responsible investors that are putting up, it's about $2 per kilowatt. So in this case, about $2 million solar garden for the Waseca. Not many co-ops have $2 million lying around, so they have to go out and find financing from partners that are willing to support co-op values, willing to take a slightly less of a return in exchange for doing socially responsible investing. I think that's the last slide I have. Yep. So any other last questions? I'm not sure how we're doing on time here. 8:10, all right. Happy to take more questions if you have them.
I got information from Excel this summer, I think, about signing up for solar energy through them.
Yep.
Okay, so
So Excel has a program called Renewable Connect, is that right? Renewable
Yeah.
something, right? And they also have a program called WindSource. And those programs are similar in that you pay an extra few bucks per month, right? In order to support clean energy. So in one case, wind, in other cases, the other case, all renewables. So not bad programs, but you're still paying more to participate. And the whole point, one of the things, as a co-op, the goal is to help members create wealth and save money. We're about giving people open access, 100% access. And if I got to pay more to be part of something, I'm less access.
Well, the lady I talked to said it's maybe like $4 more a month.
It's not a lot.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
eventually you do save money.
Yeah. The piece about, so when we talk about solar energy, most folks, it's, the clean energy is the really attractive, right? But the other piece of solar energy that doesn't come up as much is that it's distributed, which means if you got 100 people who have put solar panels on their own roof, they're essentially becoming their own power generators. And then if you get a whole city doing that, the need to have a centralized utility like Excel goes away. The whole premise of Excel is that nobody can afford to have a coal-burning electric plant in their backyard, so you have to have a utility like that. Well, if you can put solar, you don't have to have a utility anymore. So Excel is, one of the reasons they're offering these programs is they want people to just sort of assume, again, I don't want to talk badly about Excel, but they just want people to assume that energy always has to come from a utility. Whether it's clean energy, coal energy, or anything, it's just that's the way the world works. And part of what we're doing in telling a new story is to say, it doesn't have to work that way. It didn't always work that way, back before coal burning. So if we have, there's things called microgrids where 3 city blocks will get together and they'll all be doing solar energy and they'll get off the grid entirely and they're their own little microgrid. They're their own little power plant.
And that's,
It is.
right. My neighbor has solar, and she sells to Excel.
Mm-hmm.
So if the power goes out, she goes out too. It doesn't.
Yeah, and if in the other scenario, if I'm a part of a microgrid, I got to figure out who's going to do the maintenance and installation. So it's not an easy transition, but conceptually, it's important for people to understand. Wow, this could be transformational in more than one way. Any last questions?
Appreciate you coming.
Glad to do it. I want to say thank you to Lou and Eric for Lou. Appreciate you setting this up, Lou and Eric for AV. Making sure they got the physics right. Yeah. Thank you all for coming too. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing tonight, so I appreciate your being here. Have a good night.